What if I told you that one of Hollywood's biggest stars almost married her Brat Pack co-star? But the wedding was cancelled at the very last moment because of a secret the world was never meant to know. It sounds like the setup for a classic 1980s movie. Glamour, love, and heartbreak set against the neon glow of Hollywood. But this story wasn't scripted. It was real. And at its center were two of the most magnetic young talents of their generation, Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez. The year was 1985. Demi had just broken through with St. Elmo's Fire, the film that defined the Brat Pack and cemented her place among the rising stars of the decade. Emilio, already riding high from The Outsiders, Repo Man, and The Breakfast Club, was the unofficial leader of this new Hollywood wave. Both beautiful, both ambitious, both haunted by personal battles they tried to keep hidden. When they came together, it felt like destiny. Their love story began quietly, blossoming among friends and colleagues in the Brat Pack circle. Soon, they were inseparable, and Hollywood couldn't get enough. Photographers captured their red carpet smiles, magazines called them the industry's golden couple, and fans imagined their wedding as the ultimate 80s fairy tale. For a moment, it looked as though the movies weren't big enough to contain them. But beneath the glitter and flashbulbs, the reality was far more fragile. Demi, fighting to solidify her career while overcoming addiction and the shadows of her turbulent past, needed stability. Emilio, caught between acting stardom and his yearning to become a filmmaker, struggled with the weight of expectation. And when the pressure of fame, infidelity rumors, and clashing ambitions collided, their perfect image cracked. The engagement was called off. Just like that, Hollywood's dream wedding vanished into smoke, leaving heartbreak, unanswered questions, and one of the great what-if love stories of the 1980s. In the chapters ahead, we'll uncover the untold secrets of Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez. We'll trace Demi's rise from troubled beginnings in Roswell, New Mexico, to becoming one of the highest-paid actresses of the 1990s. We'll follow Emilio from his Brat Pack glory days to his quieter career as a director and father. And we'll explore what their romance, and its collapse, reveals about Hollywood itself, a place where love stories burn fast and bright before fading away. Their names may no longer be linked in gossip columns, but the echoes of their engagement remain, a reminder of a fleeting moment when love, fame, and destiny nearly aligned. This is the untold story of Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez. Long before she was one of the highest-paid actresses in the world, Demi Moore was just a girl from Roswell, New Mexico, a place forever associated with mystery. But the real mystery wasn't in the skies above Roswell. It was in the walls of Demi's own home. Born Demetria Jean Gwines in 1962, Demi entered the world already carrying the weight of instability. Her biological father abandoned her mother before she was even born, and her stepfather, who raised her for much of her early life, struggled with alcohol and frequent job changes. This instability meant the family was always on the move, chasing new beginnings that rarely lasted. By the time Demi reached her teens, she had lived in more than 30 different homes. The sense of rootlessness would follow her, shaping both her vulnerabilities and her hunger for stability. School offered little comfort. Demi struggled with dyslexia, often feeling out of place and overlooked. At 16, she dropped out altogether, convinced that education wasn't her path forward. Yet she had something else, a striking presence and a determination that wouldn't let her fade into the background. It was during her teenage years in Los Angeles that she began to reinvent herself. Inspired by her neighbor, actress Nastassja Kinski, Demi decided to try her luck in the world of modeling and acting. She took her stepfather's last name, Moore, a move that gave her both anonymity and a new identity. At first, the doors didn't swing open easily. Demi worked small modeling gigs and took acting lessons to sharpen her craft. She studied scripts, practiced her delivery, and pushed herself into auditions where she often heard more no than yes. But that persistence soon paid off. In 1981, she landed a role that would change everything: Jackie Templeton on the hit soap opera General Hospital. For 2 years, Demi became a household name in living rooms across America. Fans adored her as the journalist character who chased down stories and uncovered truths, and while soap operas were often dismissed as lightweight entertainment, the role gave Demi what she needed most: confidence, exposure, and experience. With that foothold, she set her sights on Hollywood films. Her early work included Blame It on Rio, 1984, where she played the daughter of Michael Caine's love interest. Though the film itself was controversial and received mixed reviews, Demi stood out, hinting at the charisma that would soon make her a star. But it was St. Elmo's Fire, 1985, that turned her into an icon. Cast alongside other rising talents like Rob Lowe, Ally Sheedy, and Emilio Estevez, Demi's role as Jules, a troubled young woman battling addiction and insecurity, struck a chord. The performance felt real, perhaps because Demi was drawing from her own struggles with substance abuse at the time. Hollywood insiders whispered about her off-screen battles, but on screen, she was magnetic. St. Elmo's Fire not only defined a generation of filmgoers but also gave birth to the term Brat Pack, describing the young actors who dominated 80s teen and young adult films. Demi Moore became one of its central figures, her name forever linked with a cultural moment when youth, rebellion, and vulnerability became the face of Hollywood storytelling. Her momentum didn't stop there. In 1986, Demi starred opposite Rob Lowe again in About Last Night, a romantic drama that tested her as an actress. The film, adapted from David Mamet's play Sexual Perversity in Chicago, required Demi to deliver a nuanced performance, balancing humor, passion, and heartbreak. Critics praised her, and audiences embraced her. By the late 1980s, she had proven she wasn't just another Brat Pack face. She was a serious actress capable of carrying complex, adult roles. But behind the screen, Demi was still wrestling with personal demons. Addiction loomed large in her life, threatening to derail everything she had built. At one point, her substance abuse became so concerning that director Joel Schumacher reportedly insisted she enter rehab before filming St. Elmo's Fire. To her credit, Demi did, and the experience became a turning point. Sobriety gave her clarity and focus, though the struggle was ongoing. What mattered was that she kept moving forward, determined to carve out her place in an industry that often chewed up young talent and spit them out. Her ambition was relentless. Demi didn't just want to be in movies, she wanted to matter. She studied the careers of actresses like Jane Fonda and Faye Dunaway, women who had achieved both fame and longevity, and she modeled her own aspirations after them. She wasn't content to play the girlfriend or the background character. She wanted lead roles, characters with depth, stories that challenged her. And slowly, Hollywood began to give them to her. By the time the 1980s were reaching their midpoint, Demi Moore had gone from a rootless, uncertain teenager to a star on the rise. She had conquered daytime television, survived the transition to film, and battled her own personal crises, all before the age of 25. With her smoky voice, piercing eyes, and a mix of vulnerability and strength, she was unlike anyone else in Hollywood. She wasn't just an actress, she was a symbol of ambition and reinvention, the living proof that a girl from nowhere could take on an industry built on illusions and win. And it was in this whirlwind of fame, recovery, and ambition that Demi Moore would soon cross paths with Emilio Estevez, the young prince of the Brat Pack. Their meeting would set the stage for one of the most fascinating, fleeting romances in Hollywood history. If Demi Moore's story was one of escape from instability, Emilio Estevez's was a story of carving independence within Hollywood's very heart. He was born in 1962 into what most would consider a dream scenario. The son of Martin Sheen, one of the most respected actors of his generation, known for films like Badlands and Apocalypse Now. But Emilio's path was never about basking in his father's glow. From the very beginning, he wanted something different. Unlike his younger brother Charlie Sheen, who embraced their father's stage name, Emilio chose to keep his birth name, Estevez. It wasn't just a family decision. It was a declaration of independence. He knew that the Hollywood machine had a way of rewarding nepotism, but he didn't want to succeed because he was Martin Sheen's son. He wanted to succeed because he had earned it. That decision set him apart, even before his career truly began. As a child, Emilio was often around the film industry. He visited sets, absorbed the rhythms of production, and even appeared in a few small school plays. But instead of chasing the spotlight, he became fascinated with what went on behind the camera. Writing, directing, shaping stories. These were things that captured his imagination. Still, acting became his entry point. His first significant role came in Tex, 1982, an adaptation of the S.E. Hinton novel, where he played the troubled brother to Matt Dillon's lead. The film wasn't a massive hit, but it introduced Emilio to Hollywood as a young talent with range and presence. A year later, he joined Dylan again in The Outsiders, 1983, Francis Ford Coppola's adaptation of another Hinton novel. Cast alongside a lineup of future stars, Patrick Swayze, Tom Cruise, Rob Lowe, Ralph Macchio, and Diane Lane, Emilio held his own. He wasn't the flashiest actor in the ensemble, but he brought an authenticity to his character, Two-Bit Matthews, that hinted at his ability to ground larger-than-life roles. The Real explosion came soon after. In 1984, Emilio starred in the cult classic Repo Man, directed by Alex Cox. The bizarre, punk-infused science fiction comedy was a far cry from the clean-cut teen dramas of the time, and it allowed Emilio to flex his rebellious edge. Critics praised his performance, and the film has since become a touchstone of 80s counterculture cinema. But it was 1985 that truly defined Emilio Estevez's career. In that single year, he starred in two films that would forever link him with an entire generation: The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire. In The Breakfast Club, John Hughes's high school detention drama, Emilio played Andrew Clark, the athlete. On the surface, Andrew was a stereotype, the jock pressured by his father to succeed. But under Hughes's direction, and through Emilio's performance, Andrew became something more, a vulnerable young man struggling to reconcile his own desires with the crushing expectations of others. The film struck a chord with teenagers across America, and Emilio's role placed him front and center in what would become a cultural phenomenon. That same year, he appeared in St. Elmo's Fire, another cornerstone of the so-called Brat Pack. This time, he played Kirby, the lovesick law student hopelessly chasing an older woman. Though the role leaned more toward comic relief, Emilio's charisma shone through. Together, The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire cemented him as one of the Brat Pack's leaders, a group that included Rob Lowe, Ali Sheedy, Judd Nelson, and, of course, Demi Moore. Emilio wasn't just another face in the ensemble. He was often seen as the unofficial ringleader, the one with the confidence and drive to keep the group's momentum alive. Yet acting was never enough for him. Even at the height of his fame, Emilio was looking toward the director's chair. In 1985, he adapted S.E. Hinton's novel that was then, This Is Now, into a screenplay, producing and starring in the film himself. Though it wasn't a commercial success, it demonstrated his ambition to do more than act. He wanted to shape stories, not just perform them. The following year, he wrote, directed, and starred in Wisdom, 1986, a crime drama about a young man turned outlaw. While critics were harsh on the film, often calling it uneven, the mere fact that a 23-year-old actor was entrusted with directing a major studio picture was remarkable. Emilio didn't just want to ride the Brat Pack wave, he wanted to create his own legacy as a filmmaker. This ambition, however, created tension. While his Brat Pack peers leaned into their fame, Emilio's insistence on directing sometimes confused audiences who wanted to see him remain the poster boy of 80s youth culture. He wasn't content to simply cash in on his popularity. He was already thinking long-term, about building a career that would last beyond the fleeting trends of Hollywood. Still, the balance between acting, writing, and directing was tricky. As an actor, Emilio was celebrated for his performances, but as a director, he was still finding his voice. His projects didn't always land, and critics were quick to pounce. Yet his determination to keep trying marked him as different from many of his peers who were content with fame alone. By the late 1980s, Emilio Estevez was both a star and an anomaly. He had headlined blockbusters, been declared the face of his generation, and already directed his first major feature. While some dismissed him as just another member of the Brat Pack, others saw in him the seeds of something bigger, a filmmaker who refused to play by the rules. It was at this intersection, fame, ambition, and personal independence, that Emilio's life intertwined with Demi Moore's. Both were young, both were restless, and both were searching for something more than the roles they had been given. Their paths crossing felt inevitable, but what came next was anything but predictable. In the mid-1980s, Hollywood gave birth to a cultural phenomenon that would come to define an entire generation, the Brat Pack. It was a label that began as a throwaway line in a 1985 New York Magazine article, but it stuck, cementing the identities of a group of young actors who were everywhere, on movie posters, in teen magazines, and splashed across gossip columns. At the heart of it all were names like Emilio Estevez, Demi Moore, Rob Lowe, Ali Sheedy, Andrew McCarthy, Molly Ringwald, and Judd Nelson. They were young, talented, reckless, and in demand. The Brat Pack wasn't an official club, of course. It was more of a cultural shorthand for a generation of rising stars who captured the hopes, fears, and angst of the 1980s youth. Their movies, The Breakfast Club, St. Elmo's Fire, Pretty in Pink, Less Than Zero, reflected the struggles of growing up in an era defined by ambition, consumerism, and the blurred lines between rebellion and conformity. The characters they played were often searching for identity, torn between fitting in and breaking free. And off-screen, the actors themselves weren't so different. For Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez, the Brat Pack wasn't just a label. It was the environment in which their paths crossed and their connection deepened. Both had already made names for themselves before St. Elmo's Fire, Emilio with The Outsiders and The Breakfast Club, Demi with her run on General Hospital and her breakout roles in Blame It on Rio and No Small Affair. But St. Elmo's Fire, released in 1985, became the pivotal moment where their professional and personal lives began to intertwine. On screen, the film was about a group of recent college graduates navigating the messy transition into adulthood. Off-screen, it wasn't much different. The young cast was suddenly thrust into the spotlight, dealing with fame, temptation, and the pressures of becoming Hollywood's next big thing. Director Joel Schumacher famously encouraged them to live the roles, and in many ways, they did. Behind the scenes, the Brat Pack was known for its wild nights. Cast members often partied together, going out to LA clubs, drinking, and experimenting with the very excesses their generation was warned about. They were kids in their 20s, handed sudden wealth and attention, and they leaned into it. There were hookups, breakups, and enough gossip to fuel the tabloids for years. Yet beneath the chaos was also a genuine bond. These young actors leaned on each other as they navigated the challenges of fame. They weren't just colleagues, they were friends, confidants, and, occasionally, lovers. For Demi and Emilio, the spark started during the making of St. Elmo's Fire. Demi's character, Jules, was a glamorous but fragile young woman spiraling out of control, while Emilio's character, Kirby, was a love-struck law student obsessed with an older woman. Their characters didn't share a central romance in the film, but off-camera, a connection was forming. The two found themselves drawn to each other during downtime on set. They laughed at the absurdities of fame, shared stories about their struggles, and bonded over their determination to prove themselves as serious artists, not just tabloid fodder. Emilio admired Demi's grit. She had come from a difficult background, fought her way into Hollywood, and wasn't afraid to challenge anyone who underestimated her. Demi, in turn, was attracted to Emilio's confidence, his refusal to ride on his father Martin Sheen's coattails, and his restless ambition to direct and write. Hollywood's gossip mill began to notice. By late 1985, rumors swirled in magazines and tabloids that something was happening between the two Brat Pack stars. Photographers caught them at parties, premieres, and restaurants, sometimes with their fellow Brat Packers, sometimes alone. The press couldn't get enough of them. In a decade obsessed with celebrity couples, Demi and Emilio had all the right ingredients: youth, beauty, talent, and a sense of rebellion. Still, they tried to keep their romance relatively low profile. Unlike some of their peers who courted publicity, Demi and Emilio seemed protective of their growing relationship. Insiders recall that they were affectionate but cautious, wary of turning their personal lives into another Hollywood headline. Yet even their attempts at discretion only fueled speculation. For the public, the idea of two Brat Pack icons falling in love was irresistible. The Brat Pack era also intensified their bond. Being part of that group meant long nights of shared experiences, laughing, partying, sometimes crying together as they navigated pressures few outside their circle could understand. Fame had a way of isolating people, but within the Brat Pack, they found community. Demi and Emilio's relationship thrived in that atmosphere, each seeing in the other someone who understood the whirlwind they were living through. Of course, the Brat Pack label wasn't always a blessing. While it boosted their profiles, it also boxed them in. Critics accused the group of being more famous for their social lives than their acting skills. Some dismissed them as lightweight, undeserving of serious recognition. This criticism weighed heavily on them, particularly Emilio, who longed to be respected as a director, and Demi, who was fighting to overcome personal struggles and prove she was more than just another pretty face in the crowd. Their relationship, then, wasn't just about romance, it was also about mutual support. They pushed each other to keep going, to rise above the stereotypes, and to keep their eyes on the bigger picture. By the time St. Elmo's Fire became a cultural landmark, Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez were more than just co-stars. They were a couple, though not yet the Hollywood power pair they would soon be portrayed as. Their romance was still young, still fragile, but filled with promise. To their peers, they seemed like the perfect match. Two ambitious, attractive stars at the center of Hollywood's youth revolution, holding on to each other as they navigated the wild, unpredictable ride of fame. What began as sparks on the set of a Brat Pack classic was about to evolve into something bigger, an engagement that had fans dreaming of a Hollywood fairy tale. But as everyone would soon learn, even the brightest sparks can burn out quickly. The story of Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez wasn't one of instant headlines or flashy red carpet declarations. It began quietly, almost in secret, during the very years when both were exploding into stardom. While the world saw them as part of a glamorous, hard-partying circle of young actors known as the Brat Pack, behind the scenes, something more personal was taking shape. On the set of St. Elmo's Fire in 1984, Demi and Emilio were surrounded by the buzz of youth and celebrity. Their characters weren't romantically linked in the film, but their off-screen chemistry was undeniable. Emilio, with his easygoing charm and sense of humor, had a way of making Demi feel grounded, even as her career began its meteoric rise. Demi, meanwhile, was finding her confidence, her star power growing brighter with every role. In him, she found someone who understood the pressures of fame. In her, he found someone who shared his restless ambition. At first, they kept things quiet. Hollywood in the mid-1980s was a feeding frenzy for gossip. Paparazzi camped outside nightclubs, tabloids paid fortunes for candid photographs, and young stars were often defined as much by their personal lives as their professional ones. For Demi and Emilio, going public with their romance too soon risked overshadowing their work. Both were still carving out their reputations, and both knew how unforgiving the spotlight could be. So they kept their relationship tucked away, a secret within the chaos. That secrecy made their bond stronger in some ways. They snuck moments together during rehearsals, after long nights of filming, or at private gatherings with close friends. They avoided being photographed as a couple, preferring to slip in and out of parties separately or spend time together away from the Hollywood scene. For two people constantly under scrutiny, these hidden spaces became essential, a refuge where they could simply be Demi and Emilio. Not stars, not Brat Pack icons, just two young people falling in love. Yet Hollywood has a way of catching on. Rumors started to spread, whispers of stolen glances, reports of the two leaving parties within minutes of each other. The press was obsessed with Brat Pack romances. Rob Lowe's string of relationships made headlines. Molly Ringwald was constantly linked, fairly or unfairly, with various co-stars. Andrew McCarthy and Ally Sheedy weren't spared speculation either. For journalists, the Brat Pack wasn't just a cultural movement, it was a soap opera playing out in real time, and Demi and Emilio's growing closeness only added fuel. What set them apart, however, was the seriousness of their connection. Where others in the Brat Pack were seen as casually dating, Demi and Emilio were quietly building something deeper. Friends noticed the way Emilio doted on her, how Demi lit up in his presence. Unlike the fleeting party hookups that defined much of the era's celebrity culture, this felt like it had weight. The contrast was striking. While Hollywood was busy glamorizing the excess of the 80s, fast cars, neon fashion, endless parties, Demi and Emilio were trying, in their own way, to hold on to something real. They weren't saints, of course. They enjoyed the social scene and partied with their peers. But their relationship had a seriousness that stood out amid the chaos. Perhaps it was because both carried a sense of responsibility that went beyond themselves. Demi, fresh out of rehab, was fighting to rebuild her career with discipline and focus. Emilio, determined to break free from his father's shadow, was balancing acting with his growing ambitions as a writer and director. Together, they found both comfort and inspiration. Then came the turning point, the engagement. Sometime around 1985 to 1986, Emilio proposed, and Demi said yes. It wasn't just a romantic gesture, it was a declaration. In an era when their peers were jumping from one relationship to another, they were committing. Word didn't leak right away. For months, their engagement was kept under wraps, shared only with close friends. But when the news finally broke, it sent shockwaves through Hollywood. The press couldn't get enough of it. Magazine covers splashed with their photos, speculating about wedding dates, venues, and what kind of future awaited them. For fans, it was a dream come true. Two of the brightest young stars of the decade, both beautiful and talented, pledging their lives to each other. It was the kind of story that seemed pulled straight from the movies. Demi and Emilio weren't just part of the Brat Pack anymore. Together, they were Hollywood's next golden couple. The fascination was understandable. In a time when celebrity couples like Madonna and Sean Penn or Tom Cruise and Mimi Rogers commanded headlines, Demi and Emilio's romance offered something both familiar and fresh. They were part of the same youth-driven movement that had reshaped cinema, and their engagement symbolized the ultimate union of the Brat Pack. It was as if the characters fans loved on screen had leapt into reality. But even as the world celebrated, there were undercurrents of tension. Hollywood, after all, has always loved building couples up, before tearing them down. Friends close to the couple later recalled the pressure Demi and Emilio felt, the way every public appearance turned into a performance, every private decision scrutinized. They were young, ambitious, and navigating careers that were demanding more of them by the day. For Demi, the engagement meant stability at a time when her professional life was taking off. For Emilio, it meant balancing his dreams of directing with the expectations of being one half of Hollywood's it couple. In those moments, away from the cameras and headlines, the two tried to hold on to what had drawn them together in the first place. Quiet conversations, mutual respect, and the shared knowledge of what it meant to live under a microscope. But as they would soon learn, love in Hollywood, especially young love lived in public, was never simple. The secret romance that had blossomed in the shadows was now front and center, and the pressures that came with it were only beginning. For most young actors in the mid-1980s, starring in a hit film was the dream. For Emilio Estevez, it wasn't enough. He wanted more: control, authorship, the ability to tell his own stories rather than simply act in someone else's. At just 23, he became one of the youngest writer-directors in Hollywood history, and his debut feature, Wisdom, 1986, would forever tie his creative ambitions to his relationship with Demi Moore. The project was a bold one. Emilio not only wrote the screenplay but also directed and starred in the film. And he cast Demi, his fiancée at the time, as his co-lead. To the outside world, this wasn't just a movie. It was a declaration, a merging of professional and personal lives that spoke volumes about how seriously the couple took their partnership. Hollywood had plenty of high-profile romances, but rarely did young stars put their reputations on the line by working so closely together. Wisdom told the story of John Wisdom, played by Emilio, a young man branded a criminal after a youthful mistake, who embarks on a Bonnie and Clyde-style crusade against injustice with his girlfriend Karen, Demi. The plot echoed themes of rebellion, frustration, and a yearning for something greater. Emotions not far removed from what Emilio himself was experiencing as a young man navigating fame, legacy, and the weight of expectations. Casting Demi wasn't just convenient. It was symbolic. She had recently overcome personal struggles and was rebuilding her career with new discipline. Emilio trusted her talent and believed in her potential. For Demi, the role was more than just another job. It was an opportunity to prove herself, to show that she was more than a Brat Pack beauty. For both, Wisdom became a reflection of their shared hopes, an attempt to create something meaningful together. The press quickly latched onto the narrative. Here were two of Hollywood's brightest young stars, not only in love but also collaborating as artistic equals. Magazine profiles painted them as the Brat Pack's ultimate power couple. Beautiful, ambitious, and seemingly unstoppable. Interviews from the time hinted at wedding bells and a shared future. Demi spoke about Emilio with admiration, emphasizing his intelligence and drive. Emilio, in turn, described Demi as his muse and partner, someone who brought both emotional depth and professional discipline to his life. Fans loved it. For a generation obsessed with the Brat Pack, Demi and Emilio's relationship offered a fairy tale. They weren't just characters on screen, they were a real-life couple chasing dreams together. Wisdom was anticipated not only as a film but as a cultural moment, proof that young Hollywood could do more than party and pose for tabloid covers. But Hollywood can be merciless. When Wisdom was released in late 1986, the reception was brutal. Critics panned the film, dismissing it as self-indulgent and uneven. Reviewers accused Emilio of being too ambitious too soon, of trying to emulate more seasoned directors without the experience to pull it off. The movie flopped at the box office, disappearing quickly from theaters. For Demi and Emilio, it was a harsh reality check. What had been conceived as a love letter, to each other, to their generation, to their vision of meaningful art, was instead derided as a vanity project. Overnight, their status as Hollywood's golden couple seemed to dim. Instead of being celebrated as pioneers, they were mocked as naive. And yet, within the failure, there was something undeniably poignant. Wisdom was raw, imperfect, but deeply sincere. It wasn't designed to be a blockbuster. It was a young man's attempt to wrestle with questions of justice, identity, and rebellion, and a young woman's effort to stand by his side in both art and love. In many ways, the film mirrored their relationship. Idealistic, full of passion, and perhaps destined to clash with the unforgiving machinery of Hollywood. Despite the criticism, Demi and Emilio presented a united front. In interviews, they defended the project and each other. Demi emphasized the importance of risk-taking, pointing out that failure was part of growth. Emilio acknowledged the sting of the reviews but remained proud of having tried something bold. For all the world's cynicism, the way they supported each other revealed the depth of their connection. Behind closed doors, however, the pressure was mounting. Wisdom hadn't just been a film, it had been a test of their ability to merge personal and professional lives. The backlash highlighted the difficulties of being both lovers and collaborators in an industry that thrived on judgment. Hollywood, after all, wasn't built to nurture young love, it was built to consume it. Still, there were moments of joy. Friends who spent time with them in those years recalled their laughter, their shared dreams, and the way they seemed inseparable. They talked openly about marriage, about building a future together that would withstand the fickleness of the industry. To their peers, they seemed almost defiant, determined to hold on to their bond no matter what the critics or tabloids said. For Demi, Wisdom also marked a turning point. The experience deepened her resolve to take her career seriously, to prove to Hollywood that she was more than a pretty face in ensemble dramas. She began choosing projects that would stretch her abilities, laying the groundwork for the superstardom that awaited her in the 1990s. For Emilio, the film reinforced his desire to direct, even if the path ahead would be rocky. He wouldn't abandon his creative aspirations, even if his debut had been misunderstood. Together, they symbolized something larger than themselves, the eternal clash between love and ambition, between the heart and the industry. Wisdom may have failed at the box office, but for a moment, it crystallized the purity of their connection. They weren't just chasing fame, they were chasing meaning, chasing dreams, chasing a kind of Hollywood partnership that rarely survived. Looking back now, Wisdom stands as both a cautionary tale and a love story. It reminds us of how young they were, how much hope, how much vulnerability they poured into that project. It also foreshadows the challenges that lay ahead. Because for Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez, the battle was never just about love. It was about whether love could survive in an industry that demanded everything: time, attention, identity, even the stories you wanted to tell. For a brief, shining moment, they believed it could. And Wisdom was the proof. By late 1986, Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez seemed poised to take the next step. They were young, beautiful, and in love. After months of speculation, the press confirmed what fans had been whispering about for months: the couple was engaged to be married. A December 1986 wedding was quietly planned, and although details were kept under wraps, Hollywood insiders anticipated a glamorous, star-studded event. For a generation that idolized the Brat Pack, the idea of two of its brightest stars tying the knot felt like the ultimate fairy tale. But behind the glossy magazine covers and smiling red carpet appearances, cracks were beginning to form. And within weeks, the dream collapsed in spectacular fashion. The engagement, once so confidently announced, was suddenly cancelled. No wedding. No explanations. Just silence, followed by the sound of gossip echoing through Hollywood. The tabloids exploded. Reporters scrambled for answers. What had gone wrong? Why would two people so publicly in love, so seemingly destined for each other, call off their marriage at the very last moment? The press speculated about career pressures, jealousies, even clashing egos. But the truth, revealed slowly in the years that followed, was far more complicated and far more painful. At the center of the storm was Emilio. While engaged to Demi, he was also dealing with an intensely private matter that suddenly became very public. A paternity suit filed by model Carrie Sally, the mother of his two young children. Emilio had fathered a daughter in 1984 and a son in 1986 with Sally, but their relationship was turbulent and often off again, on again. Though Emilio acknowledged his children and remained in their lives, the legal battle over support and custody became a scandal that coincided directly with his engagement to Demi. For Demi, the revelation was devastating. In her 2019 memoir Inside Out, she recalled how blindsided she felt. She had fallen deeply in love with Emilio, seeing him as not just a partner but a fellow dreamer, someone who understood her struggles and her ambitions. But the sudden intrusion of his complicated personal life shattered that image. It wasn't simply about discovering Emilio had children, it was about the secrecy, the sense that she was stepping into a life full of unresolved conflicts. The timing couldn't have been worse. Demi was finally on the rise, her career gaining momentum after years of setbacks. She had just starred in About Last Night, 1986, proving herself as a leading lady, and she was hungry for more. The cancelled engagement sent shockwaves through her personal life just as she was poised to conquer Hollywood. To outsiders, it seemed like another case of two celebrities who couldn't handle the pressure. But to Demi, it was a personal rejection, a moment of betrayal that cut deeper than most people realized. Friends of the couple described Demi as heartbroken. The woman who projected confidence and charisma on screen was, in private, deeply wounded. She had wanted the marriage, wanted the stability, wanted to believe in the fairy tale. Emilio had been her safe place after years of instability in her childhood and young adult life. To lose him, and in such a messy, public way, was crushing. In later interviews, Demi spoke candidly about the breakup. She didn't vilify Emilio, but she didn't sugarcoat the pain, either. She described how the engagement unraveled under the weight of realities she couldn't ignore. In her memoir, she admitted that she ignored red flags, that her desire for love and stability sometimes clouded her judgment. "I thought I had found the person who would never let me down," she wrote, but the truth was far more complicated. For Emilio, the moment was equally difficult, though he remained more private about it. Unlike Demi, who would eventually reflect publicly on her heartbreak, Emilio rarely discussed the failed engagement. But those close to him noted the strain he felt, the pull between wanting to move forward with Demi and the responsibility he owed to his children with Sally. At 24, he was juggling fame, fatherhood, and the expectations of living up to his family's Hollywood name. The cancellation of the wedding wasn't simply about his relationship with Demi. It was about the chaotic intersection of love, responsibility, and celebrity. Hollywood, of course, had its own take. For gossip columnists, the broken engagement was irresistible fodder. Overnight, Demi and Emilio transformed from Hollywood's golden couple to a cautionary tale. Magazine covers asked, "Why did they split?" and paparazzi captured Demi looking somber on set. Fans who had eagerly anticipated their wedding were left to wonder whether love could ever survive under the harsh glare of fame. But behind the headlines, the real story was one of human vulnerability. Demi wasn't just losing a fiancé, she was confronting her deepest fears of abandonment and rejection, fears rooted in her unstable childhood. Emilio wasn't just walking away from a wedding, he was trying to reconcile the demands of fatherhood with the demands of stardom. Their love hadn't evaporated overnight. It had been drowned out by circumstances neither fully knew how to navigate. The emotional cost was lasting. For Demi, the failed engagement left scars. Trust became harder. Intimacy more complicated. In her memoir, she admitted that the heartbreak shaped her future relationships, including her marriage to Bruce Willis. She carried with her the memory of being left behind, of investing in love only to see it crumble under secrets and complications. It was, she wrote, one of the first times she realized how fragile even the most passionate romances could be. For Emilio, the fallout pushed him further into the background. While he continued acting and directing, his career momentum slowed compared to Demi's meteoric rise. He became known more for his family ties and personal life than for his projects, and the shadow of his broken engagement to Demi lingered as part of his public story. Ultimately, the untold secret of their breakup wasn't about fading love or clashing egos. It was about the hidden weight of real life, responsibilities, mistakes, and choices that couldn't be neatly packaged for the cameras. For all their glamour, Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez were two young people trying to balance love with the chaos of their world. And in the end, love wasn't enough. The cancelled wedding of 1986 wasn't just a footnote in Hollywood history. It was a reminder of how fragile even the brightest romances can be when confronted with the pressures of fame and the realities of life. For Demi, it was heartbreak. For Emilio, it was a reckoning. For Hollywood, it was proof that even its most dazzling couples could fall apart in the blink of an eye. The end of her engagement to Emilio Estevez might have left Demi more heartbroken, but it was not the end of her story. In fact, it was only the beginning of a new chapter, one that would transform her from a rising actress into one of the most powerful women in Hollywood. And it all began with an encounter that seemed almost fated, meeting Bruce Willis. It happened in the months following her breakup. Demi, vulnerable and nursing the wounds of a failed engagement, wasn't looking for love. But fate rarely consults our plans. She and Bruce met in the mid-1980s, both already recognizable names, though neither had yet reached the full height of their careers. Their chemistry was undeniable. Bruce, then the star of Moonlighting and on the cusp of action movie superstardom, swept Demi off her feet with his charm, humor, and larger-than-life confidence. The romance moved at lightning speed. Within months, the pair were inseparable, and by November 1987, they were married in Las Vegas. It was a whirlwind union that surprised the press and delighted fans. Hollywood may have been shocked by the suddenness, but Demi seemed to have found in Bruce what she had long been searching for: stability, passion, and a partner who shared her ambition. Their marriage quickly became one of Hollywood's most watched. Together, they built a family, welcoming 3 daughters, Rummer, Scout, and Tallulah. Demi, who had spent much of her life longing for a stable home after a turbulent childhood, now had the foundation she craved. For a while, it seemed like the fairytale had finally come true. Professionally, Demi's star soared higher than ever. The 1990s cemented her as not just a member of the Brat Pack but a true A-list superstar. It began with Ghost, 1990, a film that became a cultural phenomenon. Starring opposite Patrick Swayze and Whoopi Goldberg, Demi delivered a performance that was equal parts tender, vulnerable, and powerful. The movie's famous pottery scene became one of the most iconic moments in cinematic history, and Demi's name was suddenly synonymous with box office gold. From there, she dominated the decade. In A Few Good Men, 1992, she held her own against Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson in one of the most celebrated courtroom dramas of the era. In Indecent Proposal, 1993, she starred opposite Robert Redford and Woody Harrelson, igniting debates about love, morality, and temptation. In Disclosure, 1994, she flipped gender expectations on their head by portraying a powerful executive accused of sexual harassment, a daring role that further proved her versatility. By the mid-1990s, Demi Moore was not just a star. She was a force. Her name alone could sell tickets. Producers and studios clamored to work with her. She became the highest-paid actress in Hollywood history when she earned a record-breaking $12.5 million for Striptease, 1996. Though the film itself received harsh reviews and underperformed, the salary cemented Demi's position at the top of the industry. For a woman who had once struggled for recognition and respect, it was a triumphant validation. But fame is never without its shadows. For all her professional triumphs, Demi also faced criticism and scrutiny. Some critics accused her of being too ambitious, too demanding, too focused on box office clout. Hollywood, still dominated by men, was uncomfortable with a woman commanding salaries that rivaled those of its biggest male stars. The tabloids, meanwhile, fixated on her personal life, dissecting her marriage to Bruce Willis, speculating about tension, and magnifying every misstep. Despite the noise, Demi remained resilient. She balanced her career with motherhood, often emphasizing in interviews that her children came before everything else. At home, she was a hands-on mother, determined to give her daughters the stability she never had. For Bruce, too, family was paramount, and for years the couple appeared to embody the rare Hollywood success story. Two major stars who could thrive both professionally and personally. But by the late 1990s, cracks began to show. Both Demi and Bruce faced career fluctuations. Bruce continued to find success in action films, while Demi's projects grew more inconsistent. Films like G.I. Jane, 1997, though bold, received mixed reactions, and her career momentum began to slow. By 2000, after more than a decade together, Demi and Bruce announced their separation and later divorced. To the public, it was the end of another Hollywood fairy tale. But to their credit, the two remained amicable, co-parenting their daughters with remarkable grace and setting an example of how divorced couples could still remain a family. For Demi, the early 2000s were a period of reinvention. She stepped away from Hollywood for a time, focusing on raising her daughters. But she couldn't stay out of the spotlight forever. In 2003, she returned in Charlie's Angels, full throttle, stealing the screen as a sleek, villainous former angel. Suddenly, she was back in the cultural conversation, proving she could still command attention. And then, once again, her personal life became front-page news. In 2005, Demi married Ashton Kutcher, a much younger actor best known at the time for That 70s Show. The marriage drew endless headlines, not just for the age difference but for the way it symbolized Demi's refusal to play by Hollywood's rules. She embraced love on her own terms, ignoring the criticism, and for a time, she and Ashton seemed genuinely happy. Though that marriage would eventually end in 2013, it represented another turning point. Demi had evolved from a vulnerable young actress into a woman who lived boldly, who loved fiercely, and who refused to be defined by anyone else's expectations. Her willingness to be open about her struggles, whether with relationships, addiction, or self-image, earned her respect beyond the screen. Looking back, the chapter with Emilio Estevez may seem brief, even overshadowed by her later marriages and career triumphs. But in many ways, it was formative. The heartbreak of their broken engagement forced Demi to confront her deepest fears and insecurities. It shaped the way she approached love, trust, and ambition. It reminded her that even when love fails, resilience is possible. And it pushed her to seize control of her destiny, ensuring she would never again be just a supporting player in someone else's story. By the time the 1990s ended, Demi Moore was no longer the fragile young woman who had once clung to a Hollywood romance for stability. She was a superstar, a mother, and a survivor. Her journey was proof that sometimes the most painful endings are the very beginnings of the chapters that define us. If Demi Moore's life after her broken engagement was a rocket soaring into Hollywood superstardom, Emilio Estevez's trajectory was more complex, quieter, less predictable, but no less fascinating. Where Demi leaned into the glare of celebrity, Emilio retreated from it, choosing instead to carve out a career defined by independence, experimentation, and a fierce commitment to doing things on his own terms. The late 1980s were difficult for Emilio. Though he had been the de facto leader of the Brat Pack, the group's cultural cachet quickly faded. Audiences moved on, and many of its members struggled to redefine themselves. For Emilio, the challenge was particularly sharp. He had ambitions beyond acting, writing, directing, telling stories that mattered to him. But Hollywood, never kind to young auteurs, wasn't lining up to give him second chances after wisdom flopped. Personally, too, he was navigating complicated waters. His relationship with Demi was over, and though he remained involved with his children from his earlier relationship with Carey Sally, balancing fatherhood with the demands of Hollywood was no easy task. He was, in many ways, caught between worlds, the golden boy of an acting dynasty and a young man trying to chart his own path without relying on the Sheen family name. In the early 1990s, Emilio's personal life once again made headlines when he married singer and choreographer Paula Abdul in 1992. At the time, Abdul was one of the biggest pop stars in the world, riding the wave of her chart-topping albums and dazzling performances. Their union seemed glamorous, a pairing of two celebrities from different corners of the entertainment world. Yet, like his engagement to Demi, the marriage was short-lived. By 1994, the couple divorced, citing irreconcilable differences. Once again, Emilio found himself thrust into the public eye not for his art, but for his personal life. Professionally, however, he managed to secure a kind of redemption in the unlikeliest of places, a family sports film. In 1992, Emilio starred as Coach Gordon Bombay in The Mighty Ducks. The film, about a cynical lawyer-turned-youth hockey coach, was a surprise hit, spawning 2 sequels and cementing Estevez as a pop culture fixture for an entirely new generation of fans. The Mighty Ducks franchise became so beloved that it inspired a real NHL team, the Anaheim Ducks, proving just how deeply the story had connected with audiences. For Emilio, the success of the Mighty Ducks was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave him a new kind of fame, one not tied to the Brat Pack. On the other, it threatened to pigeonhole him. Emilio never wanted to be remembered only as the face of a Disney sports comedy. He craved substance, artistry, independence. And so, even as he enjoyed the financial stability and recognition the franchise brought, he began to drift further away from mainstream Hollywood. By the mid-1990s, Emilio was focusing more on directing than acting. His projects weren't blockbusters, they were personal, often risky, and sometimes overlooked by the wider public. But they reflected his desire to step behind the camera and tell stories that mattered to him. He directed films like Men at Work, 1990, a quirky comedy co-starring his brother Charlie Sheen, and The War at Home, 1996, a serious drama about a Vietnam veteran struggling with trauma. The latter, though not widely seen, showcased his sensitivity as a filmmaker and his determination to tackle difficult themes. His most ambitious directorial project arrived a decade later with Bobby, 2006, a sprawling ensemble drama about the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. Written and directed by Emilio, the film featured an impressive cast, Anthony Hopkins, Sharon Stone, Helen Hunt, and more, and premiered to considerable buzz. While reviews were mixed, Bobby demonstrated Estevez's ability to orchestrate complex narratives and his enduring passion for socially conscious storytelling. It was, in many ways, the fulfillment of the promise he had shown with wisdom, but now tempered with maturity and experience. After Bobby, Emilio continued to pursue projects on his own terms. In 2010, he directed and starred in The Way, a heartfelt film about a father, played by his real-life father, Martin Sheen, walking the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage in Spain after the death of his son. The film, modest in scale but rich in emotion, resonated with audiences and became a sleeper hit. It highlighted Emilio's strengths as a storyteller, his ability to find universality in intimate, personal stories. For many, The Way was his finest achievement as a filmmaker. He followed it with The Public, 2018, a drama set in a Cincinnati public library where homeless patrons stage an overnight sit-in during a brutal winter storm. Once again writing, directing, and starring, Emilio used the film to address issues of social justice and human dignity. Though it didn't make major box office waves, it reinforced his identity as an artist committed to telling meaningful stories, even if they weren't the kinds Hollywood studios prioritized. Through it all, Emilio Estevez cultivated a reputation as a fiercely private figure. Unlike his brother Charlie Sheen, whose personal scandals dominated headlines, Emilio kept his life away from the tabloids. He avoided the Hollywood party scene, lived much of the time outside Los Angeles, and rarely gave interviews. When he did, he spoke less about fame and more about craft, family, and the pursuit of independence. In a world obsessed with celebrity, Emilio's refusal to play the game became, paradoxically, part of his mystique. Today, Emilio Estevez occupies a unique space in Hollywood history. He is remembered fondly as the face of the Brat Pack, as the coach of the Mighty Ducks, and as a filmmaker who quietly built a body of work defined by integrity rather than spectacle. Unlike Demi, he never became a global superstar. But that was never his goal. His aim was to tell stories, to create art, and to live life on his own terms. In the end, Emilio's story after Demi Moore was not one of decline, but of deliberate choice. Where others chased the spotlight, he stepped away from it. Where others sought validation through fame, he sought it through authenticity. His journey, though less glamorous, was deeply his own. And perhaps that is the most telling difference between him and Demi. She embraced the world, while he turned inward. Both paths, in their own ways, were acts of courage. Some love stories refuse to fade, even when the people involved move on, remarry, and rewrite the chapters of their lives. The engagement of Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez lasted less than 2 years, yet decades later it still sparks curiosity. Why? Perhaps because their romance sits at the perfect intersection of Hollywood fantasy and Hollywood reality. A glittering image that captured the imagination of the press and fans, only to dissolve under the weight of secrets, complications, and the unpredictable nature of life. On the surface, it was the kind of match magazines lived for. Demi, the rising starlet whose beauty and intensity were impossible to ignore, and Emilio, the thoughtful son of Hollywood royalty and leader of the Brat Pack, were a dream pairing. Together they embodied youth, ambition, and the kind of golden age glamour that the 1980s tabloids craved. But beneath the headlines, theirs was a relationship built on secrecy, compromise, and private struggles that didn't fit the glossy narrative. Looking back now, the contrast between their post-engagement lives feels almost cinematic. Demi became one of the most recognizable faces in the world, an actress who defined a decade, who shattered pay ceilings for women in Hollywood, who married 2 more famous men and weathered her own public highs and lows. She reinvented herself time and again, always managing to remain relevant, even when critics doubted her. Her journey was the stuff of modern stardom. Triumphs, scandals, resilience, and reinvention. Emilio, by contrast, chose a quieter path. He deliberately stepped away from the machinery of fame, refusing to lean into the Sheen family name or exploit the Brat Pack nostalgia that might have secured him more roles. Instead, he became a writer-director focused on stories that mattered to him, regardless of whether they earned box office gold. His films may not have made him a global superstar, but they made him something equally rare in Hollywood, a respected, independent voice. Together, Demi and Emilio illustrate 2 very different responses to the glare of Hollywood. One embraced it, shaping and reshaping herself in its reflection. The other resisted it, seeking fulfillment beyond the spotlight. Their love story, short though it was, represents the fragile line that so often separates the fantasy sold on magazine covers from the truth lived in private. This is what keeps their engagement so endlessly fascinating. For all the glitz of the 1980s, designer gowns, red carpet flashes, paparazzi scandals, the reality was far more complicated. Demi was navigating a new level of fame, trying to protect her heart while building her career. Emilio was juggling fatherhood, the expectations of a famous family, and his own creative ambitions. Their breakup wasn't about fading affection. It was about the impossibility of balancing private truths with public appearances. In a sense, their story is Hollywood distilled, a mix of passion, secrecy, and the pressures of image-making. It's also a reminder that some of the most captivating love stories are the ones that don't end happily. If Demi and Emilio had quietly married, built a life out of the spotlight, and settled into family routines, their relationship might have been forgotten as just another 1980s celebrity coupling. But because it ended suddenly, surrounded by mystery and personal drama, it has become something else, a symbol of how quickly Hollywood dreams can unravel. Their story also resonates when placed alongside other untold or complicated romances of that era. Think of Madonna and Sean Penn, whose volatile marriage embodied both passion and destruction. Or Angelica Huston and Jack Nicholson, whose decades-long relationship was a rollercoaster of love, betrayal, and loyalty. Like Demi and Emilio, these couples exposed the cracks in Hollywood's fairytale exterior, revealing that behind the glamour lived messy, very human emotions. Fame didn't insulate them from heartbreak, it magnified it. For Demi, the broken engagement with Emilio became a formative experience. She carried lessons from that heartbreak into her later relationships and, by her own admission, into her sense of self. Trust, loyalty, and vulnerability became recurring themes in her memoirs and interviews. In a strange way, Emilio's exit prepared her for the whirlwind of Bruce Willis, the chaos of tabloid scrutiny, and the eventual heartbreaks that followed. The pain gave her resilience. For Emilio, The failed engagement reinforced his instinct to guard his private life closely. While he never completely disappeared from public view, he refused to let the tabloids define him. His decision to turn down roles, live outside Hollywood, and focus on directing was, in many ways, a rejection of the circus that had surrounded his relationship with Demi. Where others sought validation through attention, he sought peace through distance. What lingers, then, is not just a story of love lost but of choices made. Demi and Emilio's engagement serves as a snapshot of Hollywood at a turning point, the 1980s era of excess, celebrity obsession, and the rise of the paparazzi machine. It also reflects timeless truths, that love cannot always withstand external pressures, that secrecy often comes at a cost, and that the line between personal happiness and public expectation is perilously thin in the entertainment world. Even now, when fans look back on their photographs together, the youthful glow, the sly smiles, the sense of intimacy captured on red carpets, it's hard not to wonder what if. What if Emilio's personal complications hadn't surfaced? What if Demi had chosen a quieter path? What if the engagement had lasted? Those questions, unanswered, are precisely what make the story so enduring. Their romance may not have ended in marriage, but it left a legacy. A reminder that even fleeting relationships can shape lives, influence choices, and capture imaginations for decades. It's a story not of failure, but of humanity. Two people trying, and ultimately unable, to reconcile their private desires with the demands of public life. In the end, perhaps that's the real untold legacy of Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez. The acknowledgement that Hollywood love stories are rarely as perfect as they appear. Behind every sparkling photograph lies a reality no camera can capture. Their romance remains frozen in time, not because it was flawless, but because it was fragile, and in its fragility, it revealed something profoundly true about the human heart. From the neon-soaked 1980s to the reflective memoirs of today, the story of Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez feels like a time capsule, capturing both the glitter and the grit of Hollywood at its peak. Their romance began in the electric orbit of the Brat Pack, a group of young actors who defined a generation of teen films and reigned as the cultural darlings of the decade. Demi, bold and ambitious, was just beginning to carve her name into Hollywood stone. Emilio, thoughtful and already carrying the weight of his famous family, was striving to prove himself as more than Martin Sheen's son. Together, they were magnetic. On screen in St. Elmo's Fire and off-screen in their whispered romance, they embodied a youthful kind of passion, reckless, hopeful, and utterly intoxicating to fans. The engagement that followed felt like a natural extension of their rising stardom. Two icons of the 80s promising not just eternal love, but also Hollywood's next great power couple. And then, as quickly as it came, it crumbled. The cancelled wedding in 1986 sent shockwaves through the press. For fans, it was a shocking revelation. For Demi and Emilio, it was a painful reminder that private realities often clash with public dreams. The untold secret wasn't about a lack of love, it was about the weight of baggage, the pressures of fame, and the impossibility of living authentically under the microscope of celebrity culture. Demi moved forward with resilience, catapulting into superstardom through Ghost, A Few Good Men, and Indecent Proposal. She shattered barriers as one of the highest-paid women in Hollywood and lived a life of spectacle, reinvention, and relentless scrutiny. Emilio, on the other hand, stepped out of the mainstream spotlight, choosing instead to write, direct, and tell stories on his own terms. His career, while quieter, reflected integrity and independence, a life lived outside Hollywood's constant spotlight. Their paths diverged, but their story remains intertwined in the collective memory. It fascinates because it feels incomplete, a what-if frozen in time. What if Demi and Emilio had made it to the altar? What if Hollywood hadn't interfered? What if love had outweighed the chaos of fame? These unanswered questions linger, fueling the intrigue even decades later. But the truth is more complex, and perhaps more human. Their story is not just about a broken engagement, it's about what lies beneath the glamour. The instability of young fame, the burden of personal choices, and the inevitability of secrets. In that sense, Demi and Emilio's romance mirrors countless untold Hollywood stories, where the line between image and reality blurs until even the stars themselves struggle to separate the two. And maybe that's the real legacy here. Their romance wasn't perfect, nor did it last, But it left behind a timeless lesson, that behind every dazzling red carpet smile, there is a person navigating heartbreak, ambition, and vulnerability. Hollywood thrives on illusion, but it's the fractures in those illusions that remind us of the humanity beneath. As we look back on Demi Moore and Emilio Estevez, we don't just remember a cancelled wedding. We remember an era, a cultural moment, and a story that still resonates because it speaks to something universal. Love is fragile, even under the brightest lights. In Hollywood, the roles may change. The headlines fade. The stars grow older, wiser, and more private. But the secrets, the unspoken truths that shaped them, remain, whispered in the shadows of the industry. And so the story of Demi and Emilio lives on, not as a fairy tale, but as a haunting reminder. In Hollywood, the roles may change, but the secrets stay forever.